Hi, and welcome to Bring Me My Books. I'm Kristi Cain, one of the hosts, and the other host is Travis Lowe. Travis, it's great to be chatting with you today.
Yes, good to be here.
And we're talking about The Great Divorce. This is our second podcast, our second episode in this book, and we'll have one more, but it's a little bit different. We're going to talk to someone who, I think I mentioned earlier, he says he's not a C.S. Lewis scholar, but I mean, he knows a lot about C.S. Lewis. But before we get into that, we always like to just start on a little personal note. What have we been up to? So in the last episode, you gave us a fantastic, a very hopeful and fantastic update on how you're doing. Is there anything else you want to share?
I'm helping launch a new conference in Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm. It's called Painters, Prophets, Poets. And it's this idea that, we live in a world that's, everything's reductionistic. Everything's kind of broken down to its parts. And like we think we can, you see something, then you name it, then you break it apart. And it's just like, I think in our society right now, maybe more than ever, we need the painters, the poets, the prophets, to speak truth to us in a different way, to speak in a way that's not so reductionistic, to speak in a way that, poetry has a way of saying things that you can't just state. And I think that's kind of where we are. We need a baptized imagination to help us dream of a new future.
That's good.
A new way of living. And so that's kind of the theme. We have incredible people. So Hannah Anderson's going to be hosting. She's the author of the next book we're going to do. Malcolm Guite is coming, poet from Cambridge. Makoto Fujimura, Haijin. They're coming. They're working on a new book called Beauty and Justice, and they're going to be talking about that. He's a world famous artist. She's a lawyer. They have a project in India where they started a school in the middle of the red light district.
I didn't know that.
It's unbelievable, where they have been raising up the children of prostitutes and sending them to school. And they've had people now graduating, becoming doctors and lawyers.
Wow.
And it's really incredible. We're going to have Miroslav Volf there, who's one of my favorites, one of the greatest theologians of our time. Just brilliant, wonderful man. Beth Moore is coming. Her recent memoir was just
good.
Phenomenal.
It is so good.
So it's unbelievable, all the people that we have coming. It's going to be a great event in October in Oklahoma City.
So that's been, I'm sure that's been a light in all even the hard stuff that you've been walking through. I've been able to do some fun things lately with a local bookstore. It's my favorite bookstore, Commonplace Books in Oklahoma City, and we have the fortune of knowing the owners, or at least a couple of the owners. And I've been able to help one of the owners, Sarah. She actually runs the bookstore as well, with author interviews. And just because of this podcast, she said, "Why don't you come and do some of the interviews for the authors?" And that has been such a treat to be able to interview these people in person. And but you're going to help us with some of that when Hannah. Next week we've actually got an author interview in the store with Hannah Anderson. Yeah. So check out Commonplace Books. So it's one of the local bookstores that we love, and that's just been a little joy in my life at the moment. So okay, well, we're going to jump in now to the second half of The Great Divorce, and starting with chapter 9, and this is about halfway through the book. He introduces a very important character who ends up kind of being, I would say, a guide. Would that be a good word for it? A guide for the rest of his journey through his dream. So tell us who this guide is.
Yeah. And throughout the book, each of the people have somebody from their life come to them.
Yes,
to try to help bring them to the mountain. Well, this was a person he didn't recognize when he met. And it ended up being George MacDonald, who was an author who passed away long before C.S. Lewis was born. But he was an author who C.S. Lewis read growing up. George MacDonald wrote a lot of even children's type literature. And C.S. Lewis tells us in the book that he actually first came across his writing when he was 16. And I don't even know how to say the name of the book. If you're any help with that.
I don't know. It looks almost like fantasies, but
but he says that when he said, well, I'm actually George MacDonald, and he's like, oh my goodness, my teacher. And he said, I tried to tell him what his writings had done for me. How a certain frosty afternoon, when I was 16 years old, I began to read, and I saw in Beatrice, one of the characters, what had been to Dante, here begins the new life. Mm. And he said, I saw in this character something that lit a spark in me. It was a glimpse of heaven. And he said, I had come to admit that his Christendom had more than an accidental connection with this glimpse that I got. And how hard I tried not to see that the true name of the quality which first met me in his books is holiness. Mm. And so here he is as an atheist who doesn't believe in God, and he begins to read this book written by a pastor who had lived years before. And the book draws him in, and he's called by it, and he says, it's beautiful, and I want it, and what is it? Mm-hmm. And he said, when I realized it was holiness, I tried to deny it for years. And he said, but eventually he laid his hand on me, and he stopped me.
Yeah.
And I just think that's one of the most beautiful pictures. So he says he actually said to me, son, your love, all love, is of inexpressible value. And so here he is, the teacher who touched him with a glimpse of heaven and first gave him the inclination of maybe having a relationship with God, shows up here to be his guide.
Yeah.
And it's somebody who he looks up to, who he respects, and he can't wait to hear from. But he's still got his questions.
Yeah, he does. And I love the way that the rest of the book, we see this interaction between the two. And there is a patience with his question, but never a hesitation to tell what is true, which is kind of the theme that we see here. And just this, there's just this engagement. And it makes me think a little bit about his initial relationship with Tolkien, who that was one of J.R.R. Tolkien was one of his best friends, and when they first became friends, Tolkien was a Christian and C.S. Lewis was not. And Tolkien he both wasn't afraid to or put off by C.S. Lewis, and the way that they differed in beliefs, which I think is something that we have to be careful of today.
Right.
Not to just look at people who are different from us as projects that need to be changed, but as a person that he truly engaged in this friendship with him, but at the same time never hesitated to say what he thought was true in love. And eventually we do see books being a big part of C.S. Lewis's conversion, which I think is one of the reasons that we love this podcast, because we know how important the role books can play in people's lives. But also just the kind of relationship that we see here between MacDonald and Lewis. I don't know. I'm using my imagination to think that maybe that was a little bit of a picture of the way that maybe Tolkien and C.S. Lewis could have engaged.
Well, and I just think it's fun for me to imagine, what if I had this time with these authors? I started Hope Words as this would be a great time to invite these authors in and get to spend some time with them. Yeah. But as I started coming up with a list of who I'd want to invite, I was like, man, so many of them are dead. The people that I want to come. But this is a way, he's getting to spend time with this person who had spoken to his life, his whole life, yet he had never met him. Uh-huh. What power books have. Yeah. That for 100 years later. Uh-huh. Yeah. George MacDonald was mentoring this young C.S. Lewis.
I'm so glad that you used that word mentor, because I was about to say this, but then you set it up even more perfectly. I remember being a graduate student and sitting across the table, a lunch table from my pastor's wife. And we were talking about the desire and the need to be mentored. And she said, there have been lots of times in my life, though, that I haven't there hasn't been a physical person available. Even though I've prayed and looked and there just wasn't. And she said in those times, I often went to books and found authors, some of who were no longer living. And she said, when I found those authors, I would start at the beginning of, and actually one of those is the one I'll share at the end of the episode when we talk about books and cloaks. But I would start at the beginning of their writings and just read them through and realize that I was being mentored by the author, even though what I normally think that I want is a physical person. And we do need that too. But just the power of these, of good books and all of that. Okay, well, we probably need to jump into some of these characters in the second half of the book. But why don't we go ahead and take a break and we'll hear a word from our sponsors and then we'll be right back.
Situated in Bluefield, West Virginia, the Hopewards Writers Conference seeks to equip and encourage their patrons to tell stories of hope. This year's conference will focus on the question of living between cultures and the unique potential it holds for creativity. The conference will offer many exciting guest author speakers this year and can't wait to learn what God has been speaking into their lives. Come with us and help us tell stories of hope. LifeSprings Resources is committed to providing innovative learning resources for the local church. Our products reflect our commitment to the development of new and innovative ways to experience scriptural truth. Whether you're looking for material for your small group, need new curriculum for Sunday school, or you're just trying to stock up on church supplies, we've got you covered. Look for us online at lifespringsresources.com or call us at 1-800-541-1376, and our friendly customer service team will be happy to assist you.
Welcome back to Bring Me My Books. We are discussing the second half of one of my favorites. One of your favorites?
Oh, yeah. It's incredible.
One of our favorite books, The Great Divorce. And we're going to jump in with these last chapters, starting with chapter 9 to the end of the book, and just look at at least a couple of the characters. We wish we could talk about all of them, but we can't. So, Travis, is there someone in particular that you would like for us to discuss as we look to this?
Well, at the beginning of their conversation, C.S. Lewis says, but do any of them stay? Do any of the ghosts stay? Because I've watched several conversations and every one of them have turned back. So is there really a choice? If everybody goes back, then maybe there isn't a choice. And so we see in the book one person who which we don't know. Some of the others may have, because they would cut the conversation short. We didn't really see how it ended.
That's a good point, yeah.
So there's hope. We don't know which way it went. But there's one place where we see a person who was able to stay, and the scene starts out that there's a guy and there's a lizard on his shoulder that's whispering to him. We find out later that this lizard is lust, who has controlled this man throughout his life. And you could imagine what kind of a life you live when the demon of lust is mastering you. And how that would ruin relationships, that would ruin, so many parts of your life. And he's encountered by one of the glowing people, one of the people that wants to bring him to heaven. And the person tells him, you can come, but I have to kill him.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to see the person start to justify, well, I mean, I don't want him here.
Yeah. And he's embarrassed by him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe we could just let it happen by the natural course of things. Maybe it'll die on its own.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I have to kill it. And he's like, well, if you kill it, it might hurt me.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, it will hurt you.
Right.
It's going to. I guarantee you it's going to hurt you, but it won't kill you. And it's going to bring you to something better. And you see this battle going on in his mind. I think of this, if you've ever dealt in your life with like addiction of any sort, you're not doing it because you think it's good.
Right.
You don't want to do it, but there's this battle in your mind over, I don't want to, but I don't know that I want to give it up. Right. I don't know that I want to get rid of it. But we see him finally get to the place to where he says you can do it, and it says that he grabbed it and he twists it and he kills it and he throws it. And he says that the man screamed out in an agony that he had never heard before. But he said, then I saw him start to become alive. I started to see him come to life. And life always comes after death. The whole book is, and it has to die. Yeah. But the interesting thing that happens is not only does the man come to life, but that lizard thing transforms into this beautiful horse. And C.S. Lewis says that lust, you realized how small and insignificant lust was when you saw it transformed into great desire. Yeah. And, that's the trick of the enemy, is that he distorts anything that's good.
Right.
So lust is a distortion of desire. But when lust was killed, desire came alive. And then there's this incredible quote where he says, when we give it to God, those things that mastered us, we now master them.
Yes.
And the guy gets on and he rides the horse and he masters the desire that had mastered him. And it's this beautiful picture of him going into heaven.
Yeah. Further into
the mountains.
Yes, further into the mountains. But that makes me even think of Narnia, the very end of Narnia, where it's like what it is at that point is going further in.
Yeah.
You see that picture.
Oh, so beautiful.
Well, one of the other things, so we see a lot of, I would say we see a lot of distorted loves.
Oh, yeah.
And we know that C.S. Lewis wrote a lot about love, and some of his other books, there's even the Four Loves, that's all about love. Let's talk about a couple of the characters, in addition to that one, that they are wrestling with this eye of distorted loves, which I think we could also say that we mentioned idolatry, all that. There's the woman who loves her son too much. And you and I, we didn't really talk about her at all before in our preparation, but I just, as I was flipping through, I thought, we have to talk about the woman who loves her son too much.
Which that's
such a weird thing to say.
That's where George MacDonald pushes back. He says it wasn't too much.
Well, that's true. Yes. Thank you for saying that.
C.S. Lewis thought it was too much.
Yes.
He's like, how can you send her to hell for loving too much?
Yeah.
And he said, don't you see her love wasn't too much, it was too small?
Yes. I'm glad that you said that. Yeah, it was distorted, but it was too small. What do you think that he means by that?
Well, he said she would be okay with having her son be in hell with her.
Yes. Yeah.
And he said, that shows you that she doesn't really love him.
Yeah. There's a portion, again, this is in my copy, like it's around 99 and 100. Let's see, where she says, I'm sure I did my best to make Michael happy. I gave him my whole life. And you also see a lot of this, like, but I self-sacrificed. But really, she didn't. No. It really was about her. And I think that's another tendency that we can all get into too, like this. That could be a whole nother conversation. And then the conversation continues. Human beings can't make one another really happy for long. And secondly, for your sake, he wanted your merely instinctive love for your child to turn into something better. Again, and that's reminiscent of that, a little bit of the unicorn as well. He wanted you to love Michael as he understands love. You cannot love a fellow creature fully until you love God. And I wish that was something that we talked about, I think, in the church a little bit more. Like, because I think sometimes when you're talking to teenagers and young adults and you're saying, you need to put God first, you need to love him the most. But what we don't realize is that temptation never stops. And so I think it's so important that C.S. Lewis, he talks about it in this context. And one of the things that on the outside can seem like the most pure love, a mother's love for a child. And yet, even in that,
we can be selfish.
Yeah.
We can be looking for pity.
Mm-hmm.
We can be, it can just be all about us.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned like young people. I think so many young people I encounter, like they want to do good.
Mm-hmm.
And what this book continuously says is there is no good but God.
Mm. Yeah.
And if we don't start there,
mm-hmm.
and that's what the mother says, but this was my greatest love. And he says, but the love for God is older. God loved you from the beginning, before you ever had a son. And don't you remember, you didn't even want a son.
Yes.
She's like, don't bring that up.
Right.
But he's saying there was a love that's bigger. There's a love that's greater, and you have to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's like, well, can I go on? How far do I have to go before I can see Michael? Well, if that's your aim, you'll never get there.
Right.
Because you can't love God for something else.
Yes. Yeah.
You love God for God.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything else can be redeemed.
Yeah.
Then the lizard can become the horse.
Mm-hmm.
But it can't be the other way around. And if we don't start there, if we can't find our place there, then there is no good.
Mm-hmm.
There is no love.
Yeah.
It's all self-focused. It's all turned inward. It's all distorted, and in the end, it's all ugly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have to do. I mean, she's either willingly or unconsciously completely blind, it seems like.
Right.
And as a lot of them, well, maybe all of them in one way you would say they are. There's a choice there, but there is this just blindness to what's going on inside of her. And I think that is another reason why it's so important to have some prayerful self-examine in our lives. And as we read books like this, to pause. I heard one person say, please don't read The Great Divorce in one sitting. Like, please read like a chapter a day so that you have time to internalize and think about, how am I doing? How am I doing that?
Well, I thought, like, what introspection he had to write this book.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
I actually, that was kind of a thought exercise I did. What if I were to try to sit down and write these? What would be the conversations that I most wrestle with? What would be the arguments that I have most often inside myself?
Yeah.
In the times when I'm not distracting myself with something else. But when I find myself trying to justify something.
Yeah.
What are those conversations, and what if I wrote them out? Yeah. And what would that person look like? And what would be the choices? Yeah. But this whole book, I think, this would be just a spiritual exercise to sit down and write this.
Yes, absolutely. You always talk about how teachers learn even more than their students as they prepare. I think what was going on in C.S. Lewis as he was writing this and just really examining all the things that he was wrestling, all the temptations of the voices in his head that he was wrestling with.
You don't write these arguments unless you've had them.
Yeah, that's right. And really taking time to prayerfully to muddle with them.
So I know we don't have a whole lot of time, Kristi, but if you were to write a chapter.
Oh, goodness.
What's one of the arguments? And it could be one of the ones that you see in here.
I don't know. I think I think this lady stops me short. And so I don't know that I could say like what new thing would I write, but definitely I resonate with her. And maybe because it seems that her son was older when he died. And so I have two boys older, and I'm trying myself to figure out what does it mean to hold them loosely, love them as adults, not be offended when they don't return, maybe, respond the way that I want them to respond, not try to cling, but in what ways does it mean to love them with hands open, but truly love God more? And I think that's something I will say I've wrestled with I always wrestle with as a mother. Do I love God more? Do I truly trust Him with my children when they go through hard times? Am I even then trusting Him, or I'm getting angry? I don't know. I definitely think, I definitely think that. And even, I'll point this out on page 103 because it caught my mind a minute ago. And she's talking about wanting to like, give me my boy. Like she's saying, give him to me. Do you hear? I don't care about all the things that you have going on. I don't care about your rules. I don't believe in a God who keeps a mother and a son apart. I believe in a God of love, which is something whoa, we could talk about that. No one, and this was the big one, no one had a right to come between me and my son, not even God. And that, again, that's one of those things, again, that sounds horrifying, like some of the things the Episcopal priest said. But you want to be like, in what ways am I saying that, God, you don't have a right? Because that doesn't fit in with how I understand love or truth or anything. Like, you don't have a right. And then when we look at our relationship with our kids, how are we saying, like, it needs to go my way because they're mine? Yeah. And
and you can never let them go if you didn't trust God.
Yeah.
You know, and I love the response. She says, I believe in a God of love. And he says, and yet you don't have love for anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You don't love your mother. You don't love me.
Right.
And
even she alienated her son, her husband, and her daughter.
Oh,
yeah. And you see this like she really doesn't have love, because just like 2 or 3 sentences after she says, I believe in a God of love, like you said, then she says, mine, 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 forever and ever and ever. And you're just like, oh, like I could almost imagine like taking a step back and being like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But it's really what that leads to. Okay. So even if we don't get to another character that I planned, I want to hear yours. So same question back to you.
And when I was doing it, I was thinking about, and this is something that it's something that I don't think I've really wrestled with a whole lot until like later in life. Mm-hmm. But I struggle sometimes to forgive people. When somebody's wronged me, it's like I feel like I have the right to hold on to that wrong.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, and well, I'm justified in it because I was right. And man, reading this, it was just over and over again. It's like, that is so dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they addresses what you said, no right. They have no right. That comes up.
I want my rights.
Yeah.
That's all I want.
Yeah.
I don't want anything else. I just want my rights. I've done everything right. I just want what's mine. And, it's that older brother syndrome. And there's a couple people that several years ago did something, and it still comes up in my mind to where it's like I'm still holding on.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even matter. It's like so little and insignificant. But I was so clearly right.
Yeah.
That I shouldn't have to forgive. And so that's the one. It's like, if you ever want to go further into the mountains, that's got to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so at what point do I say, okay, I'm willing to let go of it, you can kill it. And then I think, like, if he kills it, what would it become then? Like, what a good redeemed thing could that be in my life if I would do that? So that's kind of...
Yeah. And I love that C.S. Lewis gives us pictures for that. Yeah. He helps us imagine what might happen if we do let those things, if we let him kill those things in us. Well, we're going to talk about this book a little bit more with our friend Andrew. But before we do, because we forgot to do this in the last episode, and it has to do with the whole verse that we based the name of our podcast on. So what are your cloaks and books? So in other words, in case you're just joining us, at the end of each podcast, we talk about the things in 2 Timothy 4:13. Is that right? Am I blanking on that? Is that right?
That sounds right.
Okay. Paul tells Timothy, please bring me my parchments, or we use the word books, in my cloak to keep me warm. And so we like to end the episode talking about what are some things that if you were stuck somewhere that you would want somebody to bring to you, because they're either bringing you great joy or bringing you life or comfort, or just particularly important to you right now. So
mine sounds really small, but I'm going through recovery from the surgery I had on my lungs. And my cloak is definitely cough drops now.
Okay.
And I don't go anywhere without them. Like, it's become this security thing because I can start coughing and can't stop. And these little special magic things just put a stop to it. But it is one of those things that if I was stuck somewhere, I would be saying, you have to bring these to me.
Yeah,
like, I have to have one right now. So I know it's weird and it's small.
I actually think that's probably the closest thing that we've gotten in all the episodes to maybe Paul's need for his cloak.
Yeah. So how about yourself?
Well, let's see. I'll talk. I have one of two. I have two, but one, you mentioned the older son a second ago, so I'll say that one. So the books of Henry Nouwen now, I'm kind of going back through those. We talked about books mentoring us, and in some ways, I'm not Catholic, and he was a Catholic priest, and there's ways in which we're very different. But I have really, his heart for people to understand foundationally that God loves them. And then for everything else to flow out of that has just been something, it's just been a big theme. I think I've seen God using that theme through my life. And I can even see as I examine, my earlier years, how that was always present. And so his writings have been really important to me in this season. So I'll say that. I've got a fun one, and I'll save that for next time, since you kind of gave us a fun one. So anyway, well, thank you for joining us. We're always so grateful that you're a part of Bring Me My Books in any way, and we look forward to the next episode, which will continue this conversation and just all of the books that are up next for Bring Me My Books.